Welcome back to another episode of Salesy. Clearly, I am excited to be here and excited to serve you. Before we dive in today's episode, I wanted to give you an opportunity to work with me further. Scale to 5K is my signature group program that helps entrepreneurs like you start hitting consistent 5K months and grow their online business. We focus on the foundations of business, so offers, pricings, products, marketing, sales, how to sign clients, how to raise your prices, and all of those things. This framework has graduated over 100 students in the last 4 years and has actually built my own business to multiple six figures in the first calendar year, and even building these massive launches that you saw this year and last year. If you are someone who you know this is the next step for you and you are ready to see the sales page and apply to the program, go ahead and click into the show notes. It's always linked down there. And ready or not, we're heading into the next episode. As mentioned in the pre-roll today, we are going to talk to Katy Murray, who is a human resource specialist and also an expert around high achieving women and a mother and so many other things. Katy, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Megan. Thanks so much for having me.
I am so excited to dive in to today's topic because as a high achiever, I also struggle to slow down and to kind of rest. And that was something we kind of chatted pre-roll. But first, just like we start every other guest episode, how did you kind of get into all of this?
Yeah, great question. So I started a business over a decade ago. I fell into photography, and that's kind of where my passion for entrepreneurship started. And then I started to realize I didn't necessarily want to trade, I guess, time for money. So, like all of my photo shoots, I'd have to go to them and get paid. If I didn't show up, I wouldn't get paid, sort of situation. And I started to realize, like, I have such a passion for business. Like, it doesn't matter if it's photography, if it's virtual assisting, or if it's wedding planning, whatever the business element of it is, I love the business side. And so that's actually what segued into me having my own podcast and really paved the way for, like, basically just my passions. And as you mentioned, I am a human resource professional, quote unquote, by day. So my full time gig is that. And ultimately, what I do with that is I serve and support everyone in my organization so that they have a great career trajectory and enjoy where they work. And that's basically now what I do with the podcast and with our kind of other services that we offer, is really just supporting people growing in their businesses or in their organization. So that's kind of a quick synopsis of like where I am today and how I got there.
That's so cool. It's so interesting when I talk to anybody in HR because that was actually the path I was going to take before I got fully into business. I was going to grad school to then sit for it's like an SMHR
Mhm.
certification or something like that. And then halfway through, I was running my business and I was like, oh, I don't need a graduate degree. But I feel like so many people forget that there is such a human piece to not just business growth, but growth with the employees. And like some of my favorite people have been in HR and they really have taken, what I didn't know could be a career and like turned it into a full career for me or showed me that this could possibly be a career.
That's kind of funny because we're flipped. I had no endeavors to go into HR. I had no idea it was even on the radar, really. And my experiences with HR were never necessarily bad, but they weren't great. So it just was kind of a neutral ground for me. And then I did it for interim for a bit and then started to realize, like, I'm really good with people, and kind of blossomed from there. And now I'm like the head of the department and leading it. And it's pretty awesome because it is very rewarding. But you're totally right. Every single aspect of our life has to do with human resources, right? Like, as business owners, as professionals, as even just showing up online, like, we are trying to connect with humans. And so it's so crazy how crucial of a role that plays in everything.
Mm-hmm. And when you start to grow, what it looks like from an internal like company culture standpoint to then as you're growing, what does your role look like? Because HR also, I mean, they kind of have a hand in everything, which a lot of people forget, that's why I wanted to go into it, was because there was a hand in everything. There was pay and performance, and then there was employee development, and there was even, consulting on like organizational structures. But I could probably talk about HR for days on end. I want to segue into talking about being a high achiever. And first and foremost, how can someone kind of identify that they're a high performing or high achieving individual? And what are some of kind of the main signs, if they are a high achiever, that they need to start slowing down?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that I'm super passionate about. I know we talked a little bit pre-roll about being multi-passionate, and that's me in the sense that not only do I like different things, and that's actually why I love HR, like you said, is I get to touch everything, but I want to do damn good at every single thing that I do. So if you look me up online, I actually just received my very first ever 1-star review, but I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 5-star reviews. And it actually only just happened last night, but the high achiever in me is like, okay, so now what do I do to get rid of that? It's anonymous, so I can't see it, and there's no script to it. Someone just clicked a 1-star. So my husband's like, let it go, girlfriend. But
Like,
my high
no.
achieving spirit, exactly. I'm like, no, I can't. Like, he's like, okay, because the other hundreds of 5 stars don't count. But when you find yourself just really tuning into your success and wanting to be successful and wanting to do your best at everything, I think that's a true sign of a high achiever. And also just showing up day in and day out, even when it's hard, because we set really ambitious goals for ourselves. We drive for success, and you don't want to get stuck in the trap of always pushing to do more as a high achiever. So, like you said, we want to talk about slowing down when you're a high achiever, but not to pump the brakes, but specifically so that you can continue to be successful.
I think that's something that if I would have known I was a high achiever when I started my business, I could have kind of balanced my workload. I get like a visual imagery. I used to work front desk in a massage place, and we would make sure when we were booking, we would balance it so that not one person would get more booked than the other. But in business, I had really hard pushes, and then I was like, I wonder why I'm burnt out. I wonder why I'm performing higher than my peers. And something simply is starting to have a conversation, like you said, of these are ambitious goals. And it's not, I hear a lot where it's like, you need to pump the brakes, you need to slow down. And I'm like, no, it's how do we start maintaining or creating, I mean, a realistic workload. I use my air quotes because realistic is going to vary from person to person, capacity to capacity, size of teams, and those types of things. But starting the process of like how to slow down. So you work with clients who are doing that. What's kind of the process of, you identify you're a high achiever, you have these big goals. How do you start kind of slowing down without feeling like you need to stop and take a 5-day vacation?
I would say first, you really want to start with like what the dilemma is. And I think for many of us high achievers, it's busyness being a badge of honor. And we don't mean to, right? I get labeled that externally a lot. Like, you want to be busy, you want to do something. I'm like, no, pause. I want to be productive, not busy. I'm not doing busy work. I want to be productive. But yes, let the floodgates open because I want to be productive every day. And I've struggled with that, like, on my weekends when I have free time to be like, "Okay, I can just be." So I think the first thing is really realizing that dilemma that, like, busyness or productivity is not necessarily a badge of honor, and realizing that we kind of have to step away from some of our quote unquote ambitions and slow down a little bit, because when we fill our schedules to the brim and we're constantly doing projects and we have so many commitments and we're always striving to accomplish more, we're not necessarily being strategic or being intentional, and then we can burn ourselves out. So I think the first thing is acknowledging that as a whole. And if that doesn't resonate in the first moment, it's okay. Take a deep breath, because like, there are times when we probably can afford to slow down. Like, Megan, do you have anything in your mind that kind of comes to mind when you're like, yeah, I probably could slow down on that?
Honestly, I have had to say no to a lot of things lately because I've been in therapy, and a lot of our conversation, mine's a little bit different because I am a high achiever, but I'm actively in the process of grief. And so I'm not at the capacity that I would. But for me, it is like, how much can I slam in one day? That has really been where can I take it back? My first thought, though, is this book I've been trying to write all summer that, like, I have not done it. I've slowly started, but it's also like, we set the deadline to be January 15th. I was looking at my calendar the other day and I was like, I am probably not going to meet that deadline, but I could also stretch it out. I've also talked to some more people who have written books that I love, and they're like, yeah, it took me 2 years to write the book. And I'm like trying to whip this out in 90 days because I'm a high performing, high achiever person. And so that was my first thought of like, oh, like, I don't need to like double down on the book. I can actually just spread it out a little bit more.
Yeah, you could literally slow down, not do it in 90 days, and give yourself a little bit of grace. And I think another one is like guilt free, like just slow down. Because I think too, slowing down doesn't necessarily mean that we're sacrificing our ambition or settling for like mediocrity. It's really the contrary. It's about cultivating more intention and a mindful approach. So like you said, it's not like, and I'm putting these words in your mouth, you didn't say this, but you're not failing if you don't meet that deadline. What you're doing is you're saying, hey, it's not realistic for where I'm at in life in this moment. Like you said, like if you're grieving, if you have other things, if something unexpected came up, you need to give yourself that margin. And that's, I think, what the importance of slowing down is, because you don't want writing this book, or for your listeners, a task or a course or a workbook that they're making, to become the enemy that you're like fighting against and trying to get the deadline out. You got to just slow down and give yourself grace to approach it more mindfully.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned failure because before I identified as a high achiever and got into business, the idea of failing was so overwhelming. And so it was like cramming these tasks in because if I didn't do it by this deadline, then I would think that I failed. And now being in business for 5 years and having very public failures sometimes too, it's like failure is not also the enemy. I think that's something that when you're a high performer, a lot of people don't talk about is that like wanting to do things really well is actually a really good skill when, like we've talked about, you give yourself enough space to do it and you're
Mhm.
making intentional efforts with it. So it's like we're working on this, like, we call it a launch Bible, but we don't really have a name for it. But it's basically walking through all the launches I've done and kind of systemizing it, but also teaching people the process of launching. And originally I was like, oh, I can knock this out in 2 days. I've been working on it for 3 weeks. And it's like I do as much as I can. And I just accept that, sometimes you're going to do as much as you can. You can't get it all done. And rushing it to meet this deadline is actually more of a quote unquote failure. I don't really believe in failure anymore. I believe in feedback because my thought process is you don't really fail anything that you've given a conscious effort and you've tried, because most of the time you do the best you can with what you have. And sometimes it's timing, or maybe you needed to give more time and you didn't have that like capacity, or it's knowledge. And coming back to my main point though, because I can take an ADHD tangent for the next 10 years. That's the other thing about slowing down that I think with a lot of people is that you do need time to marinate on things. And that's where I've also started working with my clients. And it's starting to kind of get into like this life coaching realm where it's like, if you know you want to do something by the end of the year and you know you want to do it, you can start working on it piece by piece now, giving yourself time to think about it and to process it. And, trying not to be as productive as possible when it comes to that. Like, a lot of times when I'm working on something, I go for walks, but I don't try
Mhm.
to squeeze in a podcast or call someone or do anything. I'm just going on a walk, and that in my mind doesn't feel productive, but for whatever I'm working on or whatever we're doing, it's actually really helpful to let my brain kind of sit and work on things.
Mhm. I wholeheartedly agree with that one too, because I think as high achievers, we tend to be also in the realm of like instant gratification, or really focusing on get it done, get it done, get it done. And an example of that is when we launched Katy and Co. VA, which is basically it's a virtual assisting program that we do, but we primarily focus on either blog writing, Pinterest, or social media management. So not a traditional actual hands-on VA. But with that, my husband and I were sitting there talking, and I was like, I love Katy and Co. We've built our brand around Katy because I'm the face of everything. And this is awesome. And he's like, yeah, I think we're onto something. And we're sitting on the couch and I buy the domain and I start downloading like the things and getting stuff ready. And he's like, yeah, so maybe like we can revisit this next week. And I was like, what? I already like got the domain. Like I'm going. We're knocking this off. And he, of course, was in support. But like there are moments when I'm like, I think that if we do slow down and we sit with those, like you said, go for a walk, free up your brain a little bit. I'm not saying you have to marinate on the actual subject matter, but just giving your space, your brain space to like breathe once in a while, I think is so helpful. Now, Megan, I have I like a list of benefits that I believe in for slowing down as a high achiever. Do you want me to rattle a couple of them off? Would that be helpful?
Take us away. as
Okay.
many as you want to rattle off because they probably need it. And then they probably need to go back and listen to it again and then go back and like just start tattooing them on their foreheads.
Right. That's how I am. That's why I'm like, let me read these and I'll remind myself. But with that, I think that you'll get enhanced clarity and focus, like we're talking about. When you slow down, when we give ourselves that space to clear our minds and really focus on what truly matters, I think that most of us will find we end up being more productive. Like, again, speaking from your example of writing a book, I have a couple workbooks that I'm working on. And I was like, I can sit down and knock these out in 7 days. Like, it'll be fine, and I haven't. And the reason I haven't is not because I can't, it's because I don't have the mental space to like vomit those words onto a page right now. And so I would get back that clarity and that focus if I slow down and give myself those spaces. And then the second one I would say is the creativity and innovation will be evoked and enhanced as we're slowing down for that exact same reason. You're giving yourself time to think about it, time to marinate on it, so that you can wander and explore new ideas. Or for your book, like giving yourself a little bit more time or lengthening the runway, you might input more into that book than you would have with a faster turnaround. Now, faster turnaround, if you're on point, awesome, that's fine. And one thing that you had said about failure that I did want to chime in on too is I had to shift my mindset on that because, again, me, not you, but I'm projecting, is if I give myself a 90-day deadline and I don't meet it, I could fall into the habit of being like, wow, okay, I failed. I let myself down. But now, girlfriend, I'm pivoting, I'm moving, and I'm transitioning, and that's okay. And that was something I faced when I stepped away from doing photography. It was my income from photography was equal to my day job, which neither of them are like something to snuff out. They're both substantial, but I had to step away from photography at that magnitude because it just wasn't working, in the sense of everything that I needed to do in the time I had on my plate. And for a while, I was like, man, I'm failing. And I'm like, then what does that mean the last 10, 12 years of my life were? So, no, I'm not failing. I'm pivoting. And I think that that's a big one too, with that. But Megan, I can just keep going, but I don't want to not let you chat.
Hey, I love a good monologue. You know what's interesting too, that as we're talking about this, something that's coming up is like I feel like high achievers, and you'll probably touch on this, are kind of control freaks too. We are people who we know what we want to do, we know we want to do it. And something that I'm also learning in this season, which it's very interesting because the standard I hold myself to and the standard I hold our team to, very different. When I do work, I hold it to a very high standard if I know how to do something versus my team members who are learning how to do things. I don't hold them to that same standard because A, it's unrealistic. It's also really bad for company culture. I hate those bosses who come in and just like you feel like you can't do anything good and you're like, why try? But as a high achiever too, prioritization and outsourcing very mindfully. I am someone who I will delegate. I will also come in and support depending on what season we're in or how busy we are. Or actually, this week, it's been crazy. Last week, my COO was out. Her OBM is out with COVID now. I was getting sick yesterday, and I will not be surprised if our design lead, our marketing person, because her and the COO are related and they live near each other, if she ends up getting whatever's going around in that area. And it's so interesting because it's like we hand off these tasks and we're delegating. And by letting go of these productivity tasks that, yes, you can do, you give yourself more space, but also letting it go and saying, here's my expectation. This is the result I want, and this is the deadline by. And if you don't meet a deadline internally in my company, I'm like, I don't really care if the deadline gets met or not, which maybe makes me lack, but we have a lot of white space intentionally. I'm always like, if you didn't meet the deadline, I just want to know why. And it could be something small like, hey, I wasn't feeling it, need more support. It could be something big, be like, I wasn't feeling good, wasn't sure, those types of things. But that's the other thing with high achievers is I feel like too, slowing down is also getting help and
Mhm.
having other people help you, which I know I had the hardest time. I'm a control freak. Like, I don't even let my dad and brother clean my bathroom because I like my bathroom cleaned a certain way. They can't do my laundry because I like my laundry done a certain way. And it's just sometimes you just have to like let go of things and like be able to give yourself that space.
It's so funny because I was thinking the same thing. I actually, on my pod, did an episode about the pitfalls of being a control freak and how to unlock your full potential because all of the characteristics of a control freak aren't necessarily bad. It's just how we use them and how much we lean into them. So I have a whole episode on that, and I can talk about that till we're blue in the face. I think we're similar in that sense. Like, be it HR, be it failure, be it control freaks, we can talk a lot. But I am right there with you. And I do think that slowing down is leaning into basically different relationships or ways that you can get the most out of like your business, out of your things. And so, yeah, with that, I have like a couple others like decision making will be enhanced, your relationships will be improved, like you'll have greater resilience and well being and increased satisfaction and fulfillment when you slow down. But to transition into kind of the strategic ones like you're talking about, I would suggest like scheduling downtime and practicing mindfulness, making sure that you block off regular times like you do, Megan, you go for a walk. Put that on your schedule because we're high achievers. And if it's not on our schedule, there's a
Doesn't
large chance,
exist.
yeah, we won't do it if it's not on the schedule. Like I wrote out my schedule today because I'm working from home and I put down like literally walk the dogs like two separate times because I'll let them out and go to the restroom, but like I need to take that break. Whereas like when I'm at work, it's a little different because like organically people will walk in and talk with me and that gives me a little bit of a break. But I would say really scheduling that downtime, even like a weekend away where you purposely don't take electronics with you or you purposely like I tended to do this a lot, especially when I was in photography and did products and stuff. I would always want to create content when I was out because I'd be in a new area, I'd be fresh material. I'm like, nope, don't do that. And then setting realistic goals and embracing imperfection. Because again, as high achievers, not only do we probably share similar traits as control freaks, but also perfectionists. And that can be another big one.
I think the interesting thing too is not everything needs to be content, and that is the downtime, and not everything needs to be content. I'm a Google Calendar girl till I die. The man that I decide to marry is going to have to understand what Google Calendar is because I will be sending date invites and trips and everything else. Like, I'm going to Europe and I literally made a Google Calendar so my family could see where I was staying, like those types of things. It's interesting too, though, because I think a lot of people struggle with resting because it's not seen as productive. And I think it's like, unfortunately, it's a rite of passage where you learn that if you don't rest, you get burned out. And so
Mhm.
rest feels more productive after you've experienced burnout, but it's also detaching this idea of being productive and successful and sometimes just letting yourself be. I'm someone that if I go on vacation, I genuinely, if I have time, I will schedule, like, I will rot in bed for a whole day or half a day in the hotel and just order room service. Like, when we were in Vegas earlier this year, my ex partner and I, there was a day he went golfing and it was supposed to be 4 hours and it ended up being like 8 to 10 hours. I don't know what it was, but he kept texting me being like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so sorry this is taking so long. And I was like, nah. I like went to coffee that morning. Then I went back. Took a bath. I took a nap. I got to just like watch TV. And I was like, that was honestly my favorite part about the whole trip because it was like, when you're on vacation too, there's no urgency unless you're creating it. There are no household chores to do. I didn't bring my computer to Vegas, which was very rare. There are a few times I don't travel without a computer, but that was the same thing. There was no opportunity to work. And that's where I think a lot of people too are like, oh, but I'm losing time. And it's that false sense of scarcity and that false sense of urgency. And it's like, actually, this is one of the best things you could do for yourself in this moment.
Yeah, and I'm huge on eliminating those opportunities. Like you're saying, like you didn't have your computer, so you couldn't use it. I actually even do that in my clothing when I travel. I tend to like comfortable clothes, not necessarily looking cute. But when I'm out and about, sometimes when I travel, especially when we do like road trips or whatever, it's like, well, when I jumped out to get my photo next to that, it would have been nice if I was wearing something a little nicer. So this last trip, we actually just got back a couple days ago and we were gone for 10 days and I only packed clothes that were comfortable but cute. I didn't give myself the extra lounge wear or the athleisure wear just because I was like, well, if it's not there, I can't pick it. Because if it's there, I will pick it.
I'll
And
pick it.
same with a laptop. If it's there, with your ex-partner being gone for so long, you might be tempted to be like, okay, well, I guess I can like make use of this time. But you didn't have that option. So instead, you forced yourself without probably knowingly forcing yourself to just be in the moment. And I think that's so important.
Yeah. I definitely agree. Let me think if I have any other things I want to pick your brain about. I'm such a high achiever too, because I'm like, how can I make this the most productive podcast in the history of ever podcasting? It's, I mean, it's not, I want to reiterate though, it's not a bad thing to be a high achiever. I think there is a lot of negative stigma around that. And as someone who has been high achieving for a very long time, I wasn't in high school, but in college, I worked and I went to college. And like as a business owner, I've definitely become more high achieving if that's possible. I think it is. It's not a bad thing. Like anything in life, like we've talked about, it's good in moderation. And
Mhm.
being ambitious is not a bad thing. I think a lot of people, actually, you know what I would love your opinion on to kind of round this out is kind of the soft girl, soft CEO movement and how that relates with high achievers, typically someone who's super high achieving, now kind of taking this process, but also I'd love to hear your thoughts because I also have my own thoughts. I have an opinion about everything.
I'm gonna be honest, I'm not super trendy. So like the whole lately it's been this is not demure, this is what is that?
Oh, very demure, very cutesy, very
Yeah.
mindful, and then it's not. If you don't know that trend, it starts with a trans woman is in her car and it's satirical. She's making a joke. She has this giant winged eyeliner on and she has these big lashes on and she's talking about going to work not wearing like lime green makeup. But the funny part is she's still in kind of heavy makeup. So that's where she says like very demure, very cutesy, very mindful. I'll also do the video. It's kind of funny because she's like making fun of like herself. And then people are like running with it. And then like she's also kind of making fun of herself in it.
Okay, because I'm like, I don't keep up with all these things because I remember like Boss Babe was like a big thing. And now we've, as a culture, like trended away from that because no one wants to be like a boss babe. They just want to be a boss or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to see the shifts, I guess. And so I'm going to guess I haven't really been in the realm of soft girl, but I assume it's just a more gentle, less like hustle sort of gal pal pack where you should slow down a little bit. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. It's like the
Okay.
opposite. Think like Girl Boss circa 2016 to 2018. It's the exact opposite of it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, and I've seen a lot of bigger influencers like Jenna Kutcher or Jasmine Star, or Amy Porterfield, where they're like slowing down and embracing. Like a lot of them are coming out of their summers right now, and they have chickens and gardens, and they have this more gentle approach. And I think I'm here for it. Like I again, pre-roll we talked about multi-passionate and I do a lot, but the reason I do a lot is not because I want to have my hand in everything. It's just because my existence touches a lot, right? Like in HR I touch a lot and stuff. But I am all about like I have a book next to me and I schedule in 15 minutes of reading it throughout the day and it's a novel. Like it's not educational, it's not
As it
influential,
should be.
it's just for me. Um, because I think that it is so important. And I think that we're a little bit need to stray away from that culture of like hustle is what makes you. But I do also believe, and this might be controversial, I'm not a fan of like on the threads where it's like, oh, I'm reaching my bonus and like people are misleading other people or we're monetizing something. You're like, oh, I've made six figures today, where it's like, but it just happened because I'm over here just drinking my coffee. Like, kudos to someone who does that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But you probably put a lot of work in up to that point to get that because going viral doesn't instantly make your bank account grow. So I do think there's a fine line to like embracing it, but also knowing there is work. Like this isn't effortless for you and I to be successful the way that we are.
I think the best depiction of this, which the day we're recording this is also my grandma's birthday, so I've already like ran and got her flowers and did all the things. Which side note, the flower selection this morning was not demure, not cutesy, not mindful at all. Like, come
Oh
on.
no.
Um, I just
Poor
got a bunch of
grandma.
like, oh, I like made a bouquet. I showed up with like, I'll send you the video. I showed up with like all these, and she was like, "What are you doing with that?" And I was like, "I didn't like the bouquets this morning." Um, which my grandma raised me. She raised it. I think that with structure is function, and I think that a lot of people take discipline too far. And my grandmother is a really good example of feminine soft girl discipline. She has not been in the workforce since literally the 1950s, y'all. She never had a job. but she also ran a household. And so that does require things in like in a different time period.
Mm-hmm.
She also will just sit there and hang out. She has a garden. She sits in her garden every day. And that's where I think the soft girl movement is not a lack of trying, and it's not a lack of planning, and it's not a lack of, I don't want to say hustle, because I also feel like hustle has really just been like demonized. It's it's like a longevity game.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know that you're going to be doing this for a long time, so you don't need to burn yourself out. So why not like enjoy it? And if you're thinking about getting chickens, I vote yes at all times. I think chickens are great. In the city of Colorado Springs, you can have 6 flightless birds, but living at my dad's house currently, he will not let me get chickens, even though farm fresh eggs taste different. And this is my one tangent. And you can feed them so many scraps from your kitchen. Like when I house sit for a family, they have chickens, and I always feed the chickens like strawberries and watermelons and all this stuff. They love it. They also know who I am because I feed them. So my vote is always more pets.
I'm all for chickens. I house sat 5 years ago now for my cousin, and she had like 4 or 5, and she had blue-green eggs, and they were so pretty. And yes, there's farm fresh eggs. That's wonderful and everything. But the color, like I just loved the color. It was so pretty. And for no other reason, I want chickens. And we will probably get them in the spring. We have to have a permit. So there's a couple extra expenses where we are at. But if nothing else, that's my takeaway from this podcast. You told me to get chickens and I want to get chickens. So I'm going to get chickens. But no, but the thing, like your grandma, your example with that, where she's like, I guess, soft, if you will, what has she put into to get to that point? It's not like you or I just roll out of bed one day and decide to start a business and we go with just the soft girl era. Like, I totally understand the concept and I do think it's very tangible. I do think, though, that I don't want to ever take away, like, I want to get away from the hustle of it, but let's not forget the effort. We're still putting in a lot of effort. Like, you even said you started to feel sick yesterday, but you still showed up today for this recording. You're still showing up for your, like, for the work that needs to be done. Yes, what we do is not saving lives. We're not doing brain surgery. So, like, it can wait, but there are times when you can't always punt it down the field. And so I think there's a fine line with that. But I am all for soft girl. And I have a 4-year-old, so that's also immensely changed my perspective. If I didn't have my daughter, I would probably still be making my 6 figures in photography while also doing my full-time gig, while still running my podcast. And because I kind of take my marriage and my daughter as one of my pillars, because they take time from me, or I give them time. I love them, but
They take time, and you
but they
give them
do.
time too, but they take, to be present in a marriage and to be a present mother, they do take time. And that's something, um I also have a very strong opinion of motherhood without being actually a mother. I feel like there's a lot of moms out there who are like, it's such a privilege and a joy. And it is, but it also is very time consuming. It is also emotionally and mentally consuming too. So it does take time, especially with a
Oh
4 year
yeah.
old. That is a developmental age. That is when they start asking why about everything and anything.
Oh yeah, and my girlfriend, she keeps me honest because she's got my same level of sass, so like she's not playing. But ultimately, I do think I would be doing more, but I don't want to anymore either. And like one thing, even as a mom that took a little bit of time, is sitting and playing with her. I'm like, this isn't productive. Like, I'm not doing something I want to be doing something, and I'm learning and like falling into that it's really nice. And even the last couple of days, because we're on vacation and different things, I'm working from home, and it's actually nice to just slow down and be present, but not be tidying this up or doing this, kind of like you were saying when you were at the hotel. And I think that as high achievers, to kind of bring it full circle with that, is learning what your own boundaries are, learning what you started by saying like realistic goals, but in air quotes, because my realistic goals are going to be different than your realistic goals. And so that scheduled downtime, it will be different for you versus for me. That mindfulness, setting those realistic goals, embracing imperfection. Another tangible one for your audience is I will set screen limits, because I know that I cannot see an email come in and not be like pinged in my mind by wanting to respond to it. And by doing screen limits, I can sit and enjoy simple pleasures. I can embrace my rituals and routines, and ultimately simplifying my environment so that I'm not so overstimulated in the moment, feeling like I need to keep moving and doing things. So I think I'm all for soft girl era. Like I said, I'm not super trendy, so I don't even keep up with all the different terms. But I think organically we're all kind of pivoting that way. I think we're all realizing like chickens are bomb. Let's do it.
We're all gonna start baking bread again. Actually, a sourdough starter was something I don't know, I couldn't keep it alive. I can make a mean bread, but not a sourdough bread because I buy instant yeast. I've loved this conversation with you, and we're actually gonna link that episode about being a control freak down below. If people have felt the same way that I have, where can they keep up with you? Where can they get to know you better?
Megan, great question. I am on Instagram at gingerbiz, Gingerbiz, also on Threads, but you can always land on my website and that'll take you anywhere. That's www.katymurrayphotography.com, Katymurray, photography.com, or www.katyandcova.com. But anywhere is great. And yes, thank you so much for this great conversation, Megan.
Thank you for being on. If you have loved today's episode, make sure that you rate and review the Salesy podcast on whatever your preferred platform is. Rating and reviews does help us push out to more people, get more listeners, and be able to serve you deeper. If you haven't, go ahead and check out the show notes. We have everything linked down there. And if you are listening to this episode and you love it, go ahead and screenshot it, share it on Instagram, and tag me. Before we leave today, I want to remind you that Scale to 5K is still open for enrollment. This is a signature group program focusing on laying your business foundations, helping you hit 5K cash months consistently, so over 6 and 12 months, and being able to build your online business. This has graduated over 100 students, and this framework is near and dear to my heart because it actually helped me make my own first 5K in my business and helped me rebuild my business after leaving last year. So if you are called and ready, go ahead, click down into the show notes. The sales page is linked down there, and I will see you on another episode of Salesy.